So, what other explanations do we have for post flood giants? She's
Oh
pondering.
boy.
You got something, brother?
I said, oh boy,
Oh
this
boy.
gets interesting right
Here we
here.
go. Here's where it gets fun, guys and gals. So, I'm going to postulate that or present that this is post flood giants explanation number one. So, we're going to go back to the book of Jubilees and look at chapter 8. We read chapter 7 earlier. And this is a very interesting text. I might share something that I realized recently from somebody else's teaching. Jubilees 8, 1 through 4. And the 29th Jubilee in the first week, in the beginning of it, Arpachshad, what a funny name, took a wife, and her name was Razuiah, the daughter of Elam. And she bore him a son in the third year and this week, and he called his name Canaan. Very important name. And the son grew, and his father taught him writing. And he went to seek a place where he might seize a city. So he already has evil intent in his heart and his spirit. So this ain't good. And sadly, when you go try to live a righteous lifestyle, the Most High will meet you. But if you try to live an evil life, Satan will meet you. And this is what happens here in this story. And he found a writing which former generations had carved on the rock. So that's how it survived the flood, because it was written in stone, not on paper. And he read what was on it, and he transcribed it and sent in regard, should be send, not sent. He sinned in regard to it, for it contained the teaching of the watchers. Here we go. In accordance with which they use to observe the signs of the sun and the moon and the stars and all the signs of the Shamayim. And he wrote it down, but said not or nothing regarding it, for he was afraid to speak to. It should be Noah right there. I apologize for the hiccups. He was afraid to speak to Noah about it, lest he would be show him wrath with it because of it. I mean, obviously, Noah went through the flood. He would be pretty angry if he learned about this rock or the stone. So here's a question to ponder: did Canaan use what he learned here in Jubilees 8 to bring back the Nephilim? Now it talks about the sun and the signs of the sun and the moon, the stars here. So some people think that this is talking about astronomy and astrology, and I would agree. But the Watchers didn't just teach mankind these things. So let's see that. Let's see some of the other stuff. And somebody mentioned this in the chat earlier, talking about root cutting. So here's some more details in the book of Enoch, chapter 7, on top of what we just read in Jubilees 8 about what the Watchers taught mankind. So Enoch 7, 1 through 2. And all the others together with them took unto themselves wives, and each chose one for himself. And they began to go in unto them and to defile themselves with them. And they taught them charms and enchantments and the cutting of roots, and made them know plants. And they became pregnant, and they brought forth great giants. And the giants brought forth Nephilim, and the Nephilim brought forth Eliud. So we can see here in Enoch 7, the Watchers also taught men root cuttings. You want to share something on this, brother, before we play our first video?
No, not anything major, but I definitely can see. You and I have discussed our different takes on this. And
Yeah,
I
yeah.
can definitely see where you would come up with your theory based on those passages. So that's interesting. That's something I have to dig into.
So I will say that I'm going to present a second explanation. And I currently, with what I've stated so far, I think there's a combination of one and two. So me and Randy are on board with most of this topic, but not everything. So the first video we're gonna play, y'all know how I roll. Get the popcorn. I play lots of videos just because it's good to get visuals. So this is a series I would highly recommend everybody watch. I know there's some people in the chat right now that have seen the whole thing and they're like, "Yay, we get to see some of this." So this is a clip from. This is part three. Yeah, part three of Sean Griffin's Investigating Babylon. So if somebody in the chat want to throw his series part one in the chat. So, but it's a 21-part series. I recommend watching the whole thing in order. I tried to do
Good
it out
one.
of order. It didn't work too good, but I did. It was about 3 or 4 weeks ago, and oh my gosh. So here's a short clip from part 3, and I think the name of this one is Science of Giants. So this is going to go into explanation number 1. We was talking about with the root cuttings. It's a very, very cool clip.
This is where unclean spirits came from. The demons, the unclean spirits that Yeshua is kicking out of people in the Gospels, right? Without the book of Enoch and the book of Jubilees, you do not know where they came from. These 2 books blatantly tell you they're the disembodied spirits of the giants from before the flood. That's the only place where they come from. The giants after the flood are not fathered by rebellious angels, because those angels that did that, they're locked away. And the Father does not tell us other angels came down to do this. Any place in the scriptures that I can ever find. It's not there. Because you don't need to have them. To have a tall person, you don't need to have a spiritual father who's an angel. In fact, as we're going to explain real quick, I would submit that wasn't the cause of their height. Just the fact that the women had husbands who were angels doesn't automatically mean the baby's going to be a big giant. No, there's a reason why we were reviewing the behavior, the occultic behavior that was taught from the Watchers to mankind during that time, specifically also to their giant sons. Part of that was charms and enchantments, which is sorcery, spells, omens, and another part of it is the cutting of roots and making them acquainted with plants. And so I'll go into this just real quick. So a lot of people aren't aware that within plants and the roots of plants and trees, that there's 5 growth hormones, and they're auxins, cytokines, gibberellins, ethylene, and abscisic acid. And these particular growth hormones, they determine how tall the plant sprouts before it starts budding leaves, how big the leaves are, how big the stems are that produce the leaves, how deep the roots grow, how thick the actual stem is. All those different things, they have programmed instructions through chemical hormones. Anyone that understands genetics, you're very familiar with this already. If you're not, I'm giving you a very, very small crash course in the idea of how genetics works. And it's through, your RNA and DNA, but also it's implemented through your chemical receptors of growth hormones. So this is where, right off the bat, the angels are genetically manipulating their offspring. This is why, we'll go back to the verse real quick. This is why it says they taught them charms and enchantments, and then the cutting of roots and made them acquainted with plants. And the next sentence says, and they, that's the women, became pregnant and bare great giants. They had great kids as giants. This is why it's being told to you in that order. It's telling you what they're doing. We just have to know what the definitions of the words are that's being used in that passage in Enoch chapter 7. This is the biology behind the idea of what cutting roots means. And it's a manipulation of growth hormones. Gibberellins is one of the second most important growth hormones. It's named after a fungus, but it causes the rice plants to grow up normally tall and in Japan. It can be synthesized in portions of stems and roots, which means it can be manufactured in a lab. And there's more than 60 types of gibberellins that they've discovered and played with. And a lot of people don't realize this, but gibberellins used to be one of the main ingredients of Miracle Grow, the stuff you put on your plants and in your garden to help things grow. That's literally what you were putting on your plants was gibberellins. Now, over time, they've taken some of these 60 various types, and they have very long scientific words that they put on the packaging label. So they don't call them gibberellins now, but it is from gibberellins. That's where this concept comes from. It's literally Miracle Grow came from the idea of cutting roots. In case you guys don't know that. So this is what's going on with the Watchers, extremely intelligent from heaven above. They have more knowledge than mankind. They take wives and they genetically manipulate the birth of the babies that they're having. That when these kids come out, they're huge.
What do you think about that, brother?
That's interesting. The Gibberellans, when he said that, I instantly thought of Gibborim or Gibborim, which was the word used for the mighty man and the Nephilim. So that's
very, very close.
Very interesting, yeah.
So before I bring my presentation back up, got a couple good comments. Let's see. Tracy, come on, get up there. There it goes. Tracy Jones said, Noah's grandson found occult instructions written on a rock after the flood, which is true. And Don Carney said, come on, get up there. I've come to the conclusion that one of Noah's sons' wives had Nephilim blood, and that is a good segue and transition into post-flood giants explanation number 2. So we're going to quote again from Skiba's Nephilim book on page 156, quote, all flesh had become corrupted, and Noah didn't pick the 3 wives for his 3 sons until the very end, during the last few days before the floodwaters came. So could it be that those 3 women might have fallen into the category of those whose flesh had been corrupted?
Well, I think if we're honest with the biblical text, they would have to fall into that category, because it only tells us that Noah was found pure in his generations. So that would mean that Noah and his sons were good to go. The word pure was genetically perfect, pretty much. They didn't have any genetic corruption. So I think that would put the wives chosen for the sons into the camp of having corrupt DNA.
Have you been looking at my slides, sir?
I'm sorry. Just stop me anytime.
Nope, you're good. That was a great flow right into exactly what Genesis 6, 9 through 12 says. This is the genealogy of Noah. Noah was a righteous man, perfect. That's what Randy was talking about a minute ago. In his generations, Noah walked with Elohim, and Noah brought forth 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And the earth was corrupt before Elohim, and the earth was filled with violence. And Elohim looked upon the earth and saw that it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted their way on the earth. So we see the word perfect here in reference to Noah. So he did not have corrupt DNA. He wasn't without sin. So if you look up the word for perfect here, it's tamim. It's also used in Numbers 19:2 regarding the red heifer being without blemish. And there's quite a few passages in Leviticus, Numbers, and Ezekiel when the priesthood comes back with this word tamim, showing that they needed perfect sacrifices without blemish. So this, to me, and I'll say Randy would agree, that this is clear-cut evidence that Noah was genetically pure.
Absolutely.
So could it be that Nephilim continued to show up on the earth after the flood because of one of Noah's son's wives, possibly Ham's wife? Let's find out. So in the next chapter, Genesis 10:6, when we're looking at the genealogies, and I would say that in the past, I was like, genealogies, oh, those aren't important. But when you look at this topic, you got to know your genealogy. So I would say I had to humble myself with that detail of this subject. So genealogies are very important. And then, of course, when we get to the Messiah, there's another example how genealogies are important. So let's see. Genealogy of Ham, Genesis 10:6. And the sons of Ham, Cush, Mitzrayim, Put, and Canaan. There's the very important one right here. So here's a question. Did the Canaanites have Nephilim DNA flowing through their veins? Let us find out. So let's go to the Torah again. Deuteronomy 3, verses 1 through 6. Then we turned and went up to the way to Bashan, and Og, sovereign of Bashan. Of course, we couldn't do a Nephilim show without talking about Og of Bashan. Og, sovereign of Bashan, came out against us, he and all his people, to battle at Edrei. And Yahweh said to me, do not fear him, for I have given him and all his people and his land into your hand. And you shall do to him as you did to Sihon, sovereign of the Amorites. There's another one of those ites, the Nephilim genetics, who dwelt at Heshbon. So Yahweh our Elohim also gave into our hands Og, sovereign of Bashan, with all his people, and we smote him until he had no survivors remaining. And we captured all his cities at that time. There was not a city which we did not take from them. 60 cities, all the district of Argob, the reign of Og in Bashan. All these cities were fenced with high walls, gates, and bars, besides a great many unwalled towns. And we put them under the ban, as we did to Sihon, sovereign of Heshbon, putting the men, the women, and the children of every city under the ban. Now, why? Here's a hard question to think about, ponder. And this trips up a lot of people with scripture, especially atheists will point to stuff like this. Why would the Creator instruct his servants to kill men, women, and even children? It's a hard question to think about, children being involved. A big reason is corrupted Nephilim genetics, and also to wipe out the false worship of their deities. But I think that's something we really need to stress here is every time you see one of these Canaanites, all these ites that we've been talking about, when the Most High says to put them under the ban, that means to kill them all. It's because of Nephilim. It's a big part of it. You want to share something, brother?
Yeah, I feel like those commands were given to clear the way so there could be a pure bloodline for the Messiah to come through. You know, these hybrids, these beings with impure genetics weren't really meant to exist in the first place, which is, goes back to the video. The spirits of the Nephilim are the demons that we read about later in Scripture, which is why that the soul or the spirit didn't go to heaven or hell. It wasn't of a original flesh that God or Yahweh created with. So they weren't even intended to exist. And in some instances, it goes as far to say the men, the women, the children, and the animals as well, which I think points back to genetic manipulation.
Yeah, and that's why I forgot to ask in the beginning, why are we talking about Nephilim on the Truth About Cosmology show? It's because we're talking about the Father's creation, but how it went wrong because of some unrighteous acts of watchers.